Okay, so for today, we are going to be listing our top five favorite creature features. Now, just to lay out some of the rules we stuck by nature of a creature feature, these are all going to be either horror or horror adjacent. And then the other thing is, we were kind of debating what we would consider to be creatures. So, like, as an example, there will be no zombie movies on this list. Generally speaking, they will all be animalistic. Maybe it's about a cryptid, something that is humanoid, but is a creature. Is the best way to describe it. The biggest thing to know is though no zombies. That will be way later in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to you to get us started.
Okay, awesome. I wouldn't say that this is like one of my favorite subgenres of horror, but it definitely is one that I quite enjoy. So there were actually plenty on this list that I couldn't talk about just for the sake of time and spaces. So yeah, I really do enjoy the subgenre. But getting into my honorable mention, it is a Netflix original from 2017 called The Ritual. So this is written by Joe Barton, who also wrote the screenplay for The Lazarus Project, in my opinion, underrated horror movie, and it's directed by David Bruckner, who is sort of this up and coming horror director. He directed this in 2017. He went on to direct one called The Night House in 2021 that was really good. Most recently, he's known for directing the Hellraiser reboot on Hulu, and he's kind of just had this streak of like movies that are slightly getting more and more attention each time in the horror community. So I definitely think he's one to look out for. But it's all ultimately based on a novel by British horror writer Adam Neville, which I'm a fan of him as an author, and I'm also a fan of this book. So the ritual follows four lifelong friends who embark on a ceremonial hiking, backpacking trip in this trail in northern Sweden after the death of their fifth friend. It's like a bonding experience. Like this fifth friend really wanted to hike this one trail in Sweden, and he died. So the four living friends decide to go and do it in his honor, and they decide to take a shortcut through some woods, and they basically find themselves lost in the forest at the behest of what I ominously wrote, what lurks within. So, right off the bat with this movie, breathtaking cinematography. They filmed a lot of it on location and just some really sprawling, greenery. The forest, it feels like real because they filmed it on location. It feels like a real setting. Doesn't feel like a stage. Doesn't feel like a green screen or anything. Feels like you're there. And I think David Bruckner specifically, not just in this movie, but in all of his movies, is just a really great visual director. Like I do think he has a very talented creative eye, especially when it comes to horror and crafting horror sequences. So just the way he like frames shots and uses shadow and whatnot on this movie uh, is just a really good testament to how good he is as a director. It stars Rafe Spall, who, like Logan Marshall Green, as we've discussed a couple times, I think is a very underrated actor. Rafe Spall's been in quite a few things, but he's never really a leading man. Like he's had supporting roles in like Life of Pi, Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, The Just Mercy, Men in Black International. Like even if the movie that he's in isn't quite good, he's always a standout, and I really think actor. And he's obviously great in this, but it is a creature feature after all. So I love the creature design and the creature effects. I don't want to spoil too much about what it is or how it comes into play, but I will just say a lot of it was practical effects, and it's really creepy, really sort of sinister. And being set in Sweden with like all this like old Norse stuff and pagan stuff really sort of gets you into this sort of feeling uh, just sort of terrified about what could be going on, in these woods and these remote places. So it's sort of like imagine like Midsommar, but with monsters a little bit. So yeah, The Ritual, Netflix original from 2017.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I remember when this came out purely because you absolutely loved it and you kept begging me to watch it, and then I never did. Um, I know that it's a creature feature. However, based on the marketing, I thought it was very supernatural, and this was a time period when I just refused to watch anything that had to do with the supernatural. I've talked about on the podcast before that I have since grown as a movie watcher, but this was back in a time period where I was much less open to experiencing movies that I didn't think I'd like. Now there's a chance I'll watch stuff even if it's something I might not think I'd enjoy, and then I'll be pleasantly surprised, but not at this point in time. So I haven't seen it.
Definitely will have to check it out. And I agree with you about the marketing. I think that was intentional. I went in not knowing exactly what it was going to be. Sort of a minor spoiler. I guess this movie's been out there a while. It's gained some notoriety, but it is a creature feature ultimately. So, so yeah, definitely don't discount it as just another supernatural movie. It definitely has a lot more to offer.
Hey, that all sounds good to me. And real quick, as I missed this earlier, was that your honorable mention or your number five?
This was my honorable mention. I
Okay.
just like it a lot. So
Okay, no worries. Um, so I'm gonna kind of echo what you said. I don't necessarily dislike creature features. I actually tend to enjoy the subgenre. I've talked on the podcast before about how I believe that there are good movies and then there are fun movies. And for me, at least, with a lot of creature features, they are some of the movies I have the most fun with. And so, just to kind of rattle off a few, I was a sci-fi kid, so I watched all of the Sharknado franchise. I loved the Sharktopus movies. And then moving away from that, you have the really popular ones like Snakes on a Plane and Piranha 3D. Those, I really enjoy them. To me, obviously they are designed to be more like a B movie, kind of like a slasher kind of thing where it's like not intentionally scary, but like also could you imagine if you were just swimming in the ocean and all of a sudden a pool of piranhas came and ate you? So like there's a little bit of fear involved. Um it's an insane premise, but if there were snakes on a plane, I think a lot of people would be freaked out. So like yes, they're generally seen as kind of dumb and stupid, but also I find them very fun. And with that, we come to my honorable mention. One of the ones that gets heralded for its stupidity is 1997's Anaconda. I absolutely love this movie. I actually have shown it to many a friend, and ironically, they all get very scared at it, which doesn't make any sense to me because you can tell the snake is fake. The story is borderline like it's a horror movie, but it's basically a comedy. So when I've shown it to people and they've been scared, it's not the not what I'm intending. Um, but generally speaking, this is just a very fun movie. Owen Wilson, Ice Cube, Jennifer Lopez, John Voight, Danny Trejo. It obviously you're hearing who's in it and you're like, "Oh my god, everybody wants to see Ice Cube fight a giant snake." It's just great. But yeah, the I will say, even though you can tell it's a fake snake, I would like to give some props to the special effects crew. This is pre CGI. Everything is done with like not a real snake, quote unquote. They made the snake, but I think it's personally done pretty well. When a certain character will get eaten by the anaconda, they'll like make the insides appear, and I don't know. I just generally respect it, especially for the special effects. But yeah, it's like it's a bottle story. A group of people just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and an anaconda attacks. There's not really much more you need to know. You don't really have to think about it. That's hard. It's just a fun movie. 1997's Anaconda. And I will say, while I don't know if they hold up to the original, this spawned like a million sequels, all of which are very fun, though they all start to use like really bad CGI. So it's not like it kind of loses the the funness isn't a word. It kind of loses the draw of the first movie where it almost feels like it's like the Anaconda very much, in my opinion, captures the late 90s for movies, and a lot of the sequels are like try to be more horror because they're like, oh, we're going to use CGI and it's going to look like a real snake and all that jazz. When once again, it's still not supposed to be scary, quote unquote, at least in my opinion. And so like the first movie doesn't like the vibes, that's the word I'm trying to look for. The vibe of the first movie is very different from the sequels, but the entire franchise is pretty good, and it eventually crossovers with Lake Placid. So if you want to see an anaconda fight a gigantic alligator, you're good to go.
Man, I've seen this movie one time and I enjoyed it, but it's been quite a while. It is one that I definitely have marked even before this podcast. I've had in the back of my mind of something just to check out again because I think I watched it when I was in like middle school or something. So like obviously my A memory isn't going to be as good on it, but B just like my how I evaluate and enjoy films has radically changed. So one I'm definitely looking forward to checking out. Um, and just to echo what you said as well, like I'm also a big fan, at least growing up, of like the cheesy sci-fi, Sharktopus, as you called out, was one of my favorites. Just like that sort of cheesy sci-fi monster creature feature stuff that they had going on. And I'm a huge fan of shark movies. So yes, even though they get very cheesy, they exploit personal fears of mine. So I'm on board with all of that.
uh, Two things. One, I accidentally said alligator. Lake Placid is a crocodile. And two, thank you for saying the word cheesy. That was the word I was trying to think of, and it just was on the tip of my tongue. These are all very cheesy, but like you said, a lot of people have fears of the water. A lot of people may have fears of the jungle or the forest or just what lies inside. And especially since animals are everywhere, a lot of these movies can really play on those fears. So while they are cheesy, there's something else there to enjoy, which I think is really interesting as with this genre.
For sure. So on that note, for my number five, this is a movie that I think I wouldn't necessarily call this the scariest movie I've ever seen, but this is the movie that I think elicited the most fear and adrenaline out of me of any movie. Um,
I guess what it is.
yeah,
Is
yes,
is this 47 meters down?
you are correct, sir.
Yes. Okay.
So you know me very well. So anyone who knows me well in real life, I have severe thalassophobia, which is a fear of like open ocean and big open spaces. I really fear the ocean. I fear any body of water. I can't see the bottom and can't touch the bottom. And I have a huge fear of drowning. So this movie, more than any other, I legit, when I saw it in theaters, I legit almost just walked out of the movie, which I never ever do, even if it's horrible, because I just like couldn't breathe. Like I was just straight up like hyperventilating panic attack in the movie theater. So 47 Meters Down is written by Johannes Roberts and Ernest Riera, and it's directed by Roberts himself. Roberts is starting to make himself a little career in horror, and he directed the Strangers sequel, The Strangers Pray at Night. He directed Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. He also directed the sequel to this own movie. But 47 Meters Down follows two sisters who go on vacation in Mexico. They decide, spur of the moment, to go cage diving, and they accidentally get dropped. The winch gets pulled off the winch that pulls up the cable that pulls them up out of the water. It is basically it's just this jank cage diving service. So it gets broken off and they get dropped and stuck at the bottom of the ocean, 47 meters below the surface, which is basically like 150 feet. And they have limited oxygen. They're surrounded by great white sharks, and they're trying to and they can't just swim straight to the surface without the sharks because they could get the bends. So very, very harrowing situation. Like I said, gives me a panic attack when I watch it, and I don't know why I hate myself so much that I've still rewatched it several times since. But I think it does a superb job of establishing and maintaining a claustrophobic environment. I know this is a creature features list, and I'll get to the sharks in a minute, but just as a claustrophobic environment, it makes you feel the direness of the situation, the lack of air, the lack of oxygen. It really like immerses you into like, if I was in this position, how would I be reacting? Because there's just so much fear and there's so much suspense and there's so much terror, and it really like in from the screen into you. But Speaking of the creature feature aspect, the great whites. Obviously, this is not how great whites actually act in the wild. They're just really hyped up and hyper aggressive and violent for the sake of the movie. But something about just the ocean being a big question mark about so many things, you're just in their territory. This is their world. You're now entering into it. You're the one that doesn't belong. And you're the one that really can't fight back because they've evolved for millions of years as the top predator down there. So I think with this, it incorporates some genuinely great jump scares. There's one particular image that I think you might remember from when we watched it together, where I don't want to really spoil it, but it just comes into play. Let's just say it's just dark and then lights turn on and there's some incredibly terrifying imagery. Just once again, putting yourself in their perspective, being one to like witness this and experience this. It's just so much paranoia and it's so much suspense about these sharks coming to eat you, not just running out of your oxygen. Like there's just so many factors coming into play that make them terrified. So it definitely spikes my adrenaline, keeps me on the edge of my seat. And and yeah, I also think it has a really good twist ending. A lot of people think the ending's dumb, but I think the ending is done quite well. And once again, just gives that gut punch feeling. And for me personally, this is what I feel like was Jaws in my time, where this was much more effective than Jaws at wanting to keep me out of the water. As it was for people back in 1975 to see Jaws and not want to get out of the water, get into the water. This was my like I already knew to stay away from the water from my fear, but this just, capitalized on that. So, yeah, 47 meters down, my favorite shark movie. So it comes in number 5 in the list.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting one because I actually expected this to be a little bit higher because of how much I know that you like it. So now I'm excited to see the rest of your list. Yeah, you're better than me. I was fully prepared to spoil the scene you're talking about. To this day, I still think it's one of the most expertly crafted scenes in a horror movie, just in general. I'm not as big a fan of this movie as you are, but I think that scene that you referenced alone makes it so where people should watch this. It's just so well done. And like you said, it really makes you one feel like you're with them and you're like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Um, Now, it's interesting because, kind of like we alluded to before, with growing up watching the sci-fi movies with Sharknado and Sharktopus, and the one I didn't mention was sh- uh, the like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think is what they're up to, headed shark attack movies. Like the shark movies kind of stopped being scary to me, but I think it's because I watched the cheesy ones first. However, since I totally forgot this movie existed until you referenced 47 Meters Down, I feel like I need to give a nod to The Shallows because if I haven't seen it in ages, but from what I remember, that was like the first shark movie that truly scared me. And so since we were just kind of giving some love to sharks, I figured I'd mention that.
For sure, that's another good one. And I also do recommend the sequel to this one, Uncaged, 47 meters down, Uncaged. It's not as good, but in my opinion, it's still also very good. Like I give 47 meters down a 4 out of 5, and I give like Uncaged a 3.5 out of 5. So I don't think it's as good, but it's definitely still worth checking out, especially if you like this one.
Aren't they making a third one?
It's been in development. I don't know. Johannes Roberts has kind of he likes Resident Evil and he made that movie and he wants to keep making those. So we'll see. I would like one, but we'll see.
I know that this is not what this podcast is about, but I would just like to say, Welcome to Raccoon City got so much undeserved hate. I absolutely loved that movie. I think it's one of the better Resident Evil properties that we've got. Not that sets the bar super high, and I get why people were mad, but also it's the best thing we've got, and I'm very excited for sequels if he continues going with that. Just wanted to put that out there. I expect full hate in the comments. um, so moving on to my number 5. So it was actually interesting when I was making this list. I kind of had Anaconda as like a 5B, and then this one is 5A. I normally like to try and rewatch the movies that I'm not sure about before we do these podcasts. I didn't get a chance to, so I didn't get a chance to solidify this one as number 5. But from what I remember being a child, especially because I think 5A is objectively speaking just a better movie, I went ahead and put it higher up, and that is 2007's The Mist. Uh, as you probably know, this is one of my uh, uh, favorite Stephen King movies. Also, not that many movies scare me, but as a kid, this one really knocked my socks off. Specifically, I don't necessarily have the water thing you were talking about, but spiders creep the crap out of me. And there is a scene in this movie where they go to a drugstore and it's clearly been infested by spiders. And then there's gigantic ones, which, like, I can handle them when they're just cute and tiny chilling in my house. But if it was bigger than me, I think I would just have to lay down and accept my fate. So spiders are what gets me, not sharks necessarily. And so that scene alone makes me love this movie, but also the twist ending. I think, if I remember correctly, even Stephen King gave props to the writers for this ending because it's different from the one in his book. And it just, man, you go on this ride from start to finish. I guess I should have said what this movie's about. Thomas Jane and a ragtag group of people just happen to be at a grocery store when this mist overtakes their town in Maine, because it's Stephen King. And in that mist are all of these crazy creatures. So, like, as a kid, the scene that used to scare the crap out of me was when that octopus tentacle thing comes through the back door and takes away the one dude who works at the grocery store. That used to creep me out. There are these gigantic, like, mosquito bug things that break into the grocery store that are really creepy. Like I said, I really wish I could have rewatched this before the podcast, but I very vividly remember certain scenes that creeped me out. Uh, but yeah, everybody's just kind of trapped in the grocery store, and from what I remember, it kind of pulls one of those, okay, we now have this mini society that is now inside of a place, and then people start separating because they have different ideologies on what should we do, who should we trust, and that always also I enjoy when people kind of like play with the idea of like human nature. I generally tend to enjoy that, which is also what I was alluding to at the beginning of why I think this deserved more to be in the fifth slot than Anaconda, because Anaconda's story isn't designed to be good. I think, if I remember correctly, the Mist story is really good, and so that's kind of why I put it here. But yeah, this, for the longest time, this was my favorite Stephen King movie. But it's really really good, and I would definitely classify this as a bottle story. I guess because of how many people there are, you could make the argument it's not, but because it just follows the same group in basically two locations for the entire movie, I would say it falls inside of that, and I think it does it really well. And yeah, I personally don't like I think its name is Marcia Gay Harden. I could be mispronouncing that, but I know she was like a famous actress way back when, and like my parents liked her and whatnot. Because of this movie, I hate her with a passion. I don't like her character. I think it's probably designed that way, but also, like I said, maybe some people agreed with her and whatever. But yeah, it's nice to have a creature feature movie that also has the sort of philosophical quandary woven in, and like, what would you do in this situation? So yeah, 2007's The Mist, and once again, I just got that ending is just, I'm not going to spoil it at all. Go watch the movie. That ending, you've just been on this entire ride and then it just hits you. Oof.
So, you're not going to believe this. Number 4, The Mist. My number 4.
All right. Now you talk.
So, yeah, no, that's funny how that worked out, and it was so close together. No, I mean, I co-sign everything you said. You literally every one of my notes you basically touched on. So, yeah, it's a great movie. It's a great I like the novella. It does change the ending for the better. Even Stephen King himself has said so, and he tends to get very touchy when people change his material, but he actually agreed that this was better. Um, yeah, basically, I co-sign everything you said. I think as far as creatures go for a creature feature, it's got some great creature diversity. Like you alluded to, there's spiders, there's mosquitoes, there's these little bird things, there's octopus tentacles, like there's just all sorts of different creatures in a different mixture of special effects and CGI and whatnot. I did consider it a bottle story. We both like bottle stories. I definitely think that this qualifies, and it does a good job at that. And sort of like you alluded to with like the human nature thing, what I wrote down here is it's really just adult Lord of the Flies. I
Mm,
mean, when you think about it.
yep, that's a really
And
good
so
call
that
out.
Right, and so that's just obviously very interesting because that's what the whole movie's about. Just like how are civilized people going to act when, the world ends or they get cut off from civilization? Is the civilized going to leave the people when they leave civilization? Um, so yeah, and it's funny because Frank Darabont wrote and directed it, and he has a history of good Stephen King adaptations. He did The Shawshank Redemption, he did The Green Mile, but interestingly, a couple years after this, he was one of the showrunners on The Walking Dead, and there's like three Walking Dead actors as main characters here, like 3 years before The Walking Dead even was a thing. Like uh Andrea, Dale, and Carol, the actors that play them are like main characters in this movie, and this was like years before The Walking Dead even happened. So I guess Darabont liked working with them enough that he brought them on board. But that's always funny to watch because I watched it after I had been like watching The Walking Dead for a while. So I was like, oh, that's Andrea, that's Dale, that's Carol. It was just cool to see.
Yeah, that I've definitely heard that. I feel like the actors and creators will like working with their actors, and they'll just kind of bring them back on future projects. So that makes sense. But that is cool. I personally have never seen The Walking Dead. I know that that's a travesty. But that's a cool call out.
Sure. So since that was my number four, I guess we'll go down to, I don't know, how do you want to do this? Do you want to just give your number four then?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and do my number four because they're from 4 through 1. There's no way we're gonna have them similar. Um, this is gonna
Sounds
so
good.
3 of my top 4 are all from 2014. And I was laughing when I realized this. I swear this wasn't planned. Apparently, I just really like 2014 creature features. Um, so number 4 is 2014's Backcountry. And essentially, the setup to this is there's a couple who are going hiking in the woods, and they end up going to this beautiful like mountaintop. Like it oversees everything. It's something straight out of a movie, ironically, quote unquote. Uh, and while up there, the
Because
guy
it is.
proposes. He proposes to his girlfriend. She says yes. It's awesome. We're like 25 minutes in because they really take time to kind of show you their relationship. They show you the scenery of the forest and kind of set things up. But after she says yes, she's like, "All right, I'm ready. Let's go back." And he goes, "Oh, I'm lost." And so they're stuck in the woods, and then to make things worse, they are being hunted by a bear. Now, I famously was really mad at The Revenant multiple podcasts ago. However, I'm not anti-bear. And of all of the different bear movies that I've personally seen, I think Backcountry does it the best because not that this still isn't, not accurate for a bear. However, generally speaking, when like bears are in movies, they completely just like the writers will make them not act like how they are in real life. And in this one, they do stuff to make it work to where once again, you're not going to be chased for multiple hours by a bear on your trail. Like every animal person has confirmed that's not going to happen. However, the bear like has the scent that the she goes near the cub, so now the mama has to protect it. Like they kind of riddle stuff in to where it almost seems realistic and makes you freaked out that you might one day be hunted by a bear yourself. And it's almost like it's actually, hold on, this is going to be a really comparison. It's almost like the first Alien movie where it's just kind of sneaking around while you're being hunted by an alien, but it's almost like a slasher movie kind of thing where they're just kind of stalking you because there's very little murder in this movie. There's very little characters. And so uh it's just the fun stuff that they do with the bear. And the coolest part is this is based on a true story. So, and it's not one of those things where, like in The Strangers, where they say based on a true story just to kind of get extra effect, but it wasn't really based on a true story. This was based on like a real true story, and apparently, like the couple had this encounter with a bear and it had like gotten the scent of them, so it kind of followed them, but it didn't murder them, of course. In this movie things go very different. um but the they ended up having to like do stuff to escape the bear, and then when they got out of the forest they were like, hey, let's make a movie about it. But yeah, it's like a slow burn kind of thing, which isn't normally my thing, but in this movie I think it really works. uh and it just really it's almost, actually I would echo the way you described 47 meters down. It's really good at building the tension. It has a really good atmosphere, and it like when I watch this movie, and I've seen it a couple times now, I'm just fully engulfed in what's going on. Like I'm very much at the edge of my seat. Obviously I know what happens because I've seen it a couple times, but even still, like the creator did a really good job of making it to where you feel for the characters. And like I think we're just going to keep echoing the same thing. You wonder, what would you do in the situation if you were being hunted by a bear? And yeah, it's just the in my personal opinion of the ones I've seen, it's the best bear movie. And so yeah, 2014's Backcountry.
No, this is a great pick and definitely an underwatched and underrated one for sure. I did consider actually putting this one on my list because I do enjoy it a lot. It's one of my favorite IFC midnight films. Um, yeah, no, like you said, we're going to be echoing each other a lot, but I just completely agree. It's sort of like what I said with 47 meters down, where it's like you're so out of your element. Like you're not in your world anymore. You're in their world. In this case, it's the bear in the woods. That's their territory, and you're the one that doesn't belong. So it sort of just puts you at the behest of that. And yeah, it just makes for some really compelling filmmaking, really good thrills. Really good. It's like a subtle form of horror, I feel like, in movies like this, where it just like makes it, it's about the dread sinking in, not necessarily scares, even though there are definitely some scares. Um, but yeah, it's just sort of just the carelessness, or maybe not carelessness isn't the word, just like how, you know, nature doesn't abide by laws and rules like humans do. Like the bear, he's not even just doing it out of malice, or he's not doing it out of, aggression. He's just doing it because he's a bear and it's just what he does. And some part of that's just like terrifying. There's like no reasoning with nature and there's no rationalizing with nature. And that's why I just feel like it's most compelling about movies like this. But this is definitely one of the best examples of, a movie like that.
And I want to just follow off of that because I think you make a good point. I think generally speaking, as humans, we often forget that animals are animals. Um, like you said, this is just a bear, and a bear is going to do what a bear is going to do. And if a bear wanted to, it could wholeheartedly take out a human. And so that's just like, we don't think about it in everyday life because we don't have to. But that is a fact. It's kind of like those memes you see where it's like, the chances of your dog killing you are very low, but not zero. Um, so it's just one of those things that kind of adds that extra creep factor. And uh, kind of echoing what we talked about on a couple podcasts before. This was another one that I just randomly found on Netflix back in the heyday of when they shoved this stuff on there. So there we go. Thank you, Netflix.
I as well. No, actually, very same story. I've reflected that about a lot. So Netflix gave me a lot back in like 2014, 2015. So I wouldn't have seen them otherwise. So a good pick. Okay, my number three um, is a movie from 2005 called The Descent. So this is written and directed by Neil Marshall, who's another one of these sort of underrated horror directors. He did Dog Soldiers in the early 2000s. He did the most recent Hellboy reboot with David Harbour from 2019 that I personally think is a very underrated film, but that's neither here nor there. But he's this British horror filmmaker who apparently is a lot more popular in the UK than he is here. Like a lot of his films are like British made films, not Hollywood films. So I've been meaning to check out a lot more of his work, but I do like what he's given us so far. But so this movie is called The Descent. It is about an all-female group of friends who are extreme sports enthusiasts who decide they're going to spelunk into an unexplored cave system in the mountains of western North Carolina. And basically, they get lost and they get trapped underground in this labyrinthine cave system. And they come across a den of these. I guess the best way to describe them is like humanoid evolutionary offshoot, primitive, savage creature things that live beneath the surface world. And yeah, I mean, getting right to it, it's just first of all, really great creature design. The way that these creatures look, it almost feels like it would be real. Like you think like, okay, what if there were like, humans that went down into these caves and got stuck for thousands of years? Like what would they look like? And a lot of it, I mean, I'm pretty sure all of it really is just practical. It's just these suits of these like weird, evolutionary offshoot creatures that I think is really compelling and really terrifying. Um, it comes with it with some excellent jump scares. Like, once again, with a lot of these, don't want to spoil specific scenes, but I will just say the first scene where you actually see these creatures is very terrifying. It's a great jump scare moment that sort of comes out of nowhere. And just like with 47 meters down, I mean, the claustrophobia, I mean, they film, I don't believe, probably should have done some research before that. I don't believe they actually filmed necessarily in like a whole underground cave system the entire time, but it wasn't just like sound stages. Like some of this was like actually in caves. So it really, immerses you in like the claustrophobia. And you got to imagine, as a common theme with these movies, putting yourself in these positions, you're literally stuck underground. No natural source of light, no natural source of food. There might be water, but who knows if it's potable or not. And there's these creatures down here that, once again, common theme again, this is their world, not yours. And you're the one that's interloping. You're the one that's interfering. So of course they're going to naturally come for you. So just overall, lots of thrills, lots of adrenaline, and there's a human story along with this about these characters that these conflicts start to come out from their personal lives while they're in these situations. And I just think that the acting's really good, but also it's just some very compelling character work and interactions. So it's always good when the human story can also be very up to par as well. But this one also famously comes to a very gut punch ending, like The Mist. Maybe not quite as much of a gut punch, but it has a notorious ending. So definitely check it out if not for that. The sequel's garbage. Never watch the sequel. But this first one, at least, is very solid. And as someone who, on top of water, I don't know what the specific phobia for this is. I have this like irrational fear of like, maybe not even irrational. I have this fear of like middle of nowhere places, like, the hillbilly backwoods places. And so I kind of put this in like a similar camp of like you just being out so far from civilization and being at the behest of these just, you know, you, crazy native creatures and things like that. So it obviously takes things a lot farther than like a wrong turn or The Hills Have Eyes, but in a way it's very similar, but just taking it further with the animalistic nature of the perpetrators. So yeah, The Descent, 2005.
So it's interesting. I was trying to look up the fear you're describing, and apparently it is a subset of agoraphobia, which, as you probably know, is the one that keeps people inside. But it says that it stems from fear of avoiding places or situation that might cause panic or feelings of being trapped, helpless, or embarrassed, and then specifically leaving familiar environments such as going into the woods or going into the middle of nowhere because you are afraid of having a panic attack or what might lie there waiting for you. I did not know that that was a subset of agoraphobia, but I guess it is.
There you go.
Um, yeah, no, this is definitely a great movie. I'll go ahead and spoil. This is for a future podcast. This is one of the scariest movies I've ever personally seen. Like you said, the creature design is amazing. I've watched the behind the scenes on this, and it was all done with special effects. So I'm obviously going to give them a round of applause. If I haven't said it, I'm a big special effects guy. I will always prefer that over CGI, though I know CGI has gotten good as of recent. I just love special effects. It's cool to me. And yeah, like you said, this is definitely one of the creepier ones. I so it's weird. I am not claustrophobic. However, I don't like the idea of being restrained. And so, especially considering as to how there are numerous instances where they have to crawl through these insanely tight spaces. Once again, it's not being claustrophobic. I'm not going to have a panic attack, but I'm going to want to get out of there as quickly as possible because it's just so creepy, especially because you're underground. Stuff could crush you and at any moment. And then, of course, these crawlers add in that added layer. It's just woof. Yeah, this is a very solid movie. It definitely makes me not want to go cave diving. Because you never obviously it's like, oh, this is fake, but there have been tons of scientists who have gone randomly cave diving or randomly into unexplored areas and found stuff that we didn't know existed. So there is that layer of, oh, this could really happen and you never know what you're walking into. And yeah, it's just, especially because I live in the middle of nowhere. I live in a mountain. And so you never know.
Full disclosure, I like genuinely believe that this is probably real. Like I would like there's got to be some sort of like humanoid offshoot living underground. I don't know. One of those things I have zero actual evidence for, but I just feel like this sounds about right.
Well, so you know the Wrong Turn movies?
Yes.
So they're, of course, about inbreds who happen to live in the mountains, and take that as you will, but one of the rules that we have here is there are mountain people who obey mountain law, and the cops don't go up there. You know not to go up there, don't go on their land. And like there are civilizations like that. They kind of play around with that idea in the Wrong Turn reboot, where it's that group of people who have just been living in the forest for ages and they have their own society. So I don't know if I believe it as wholeheartedly as you do, but I could fully grasp. Like if someone said, "Hey, we found these crawlers in this cave," I wouldn't be surprised. It's the best way I can put it, because there's just so much stuff we haven't explored as humans in general, and I would not put it past anything that
Yeah.
that crazy stuff like this exists.
Yeah, there's also a show called I think it's The Outlanders or something like that. I need to like Google what the actual name was. It was very short-lived. It only was like a season or two, but it was literally about that. It was about this whole community that basically it was almost like a native reservation. Like they basically had their own rules and their own laws, and the local and state governments just like let them do what they wanted in the mountains. And they had like no internet, no running water, but they had like a thriving mountain civilization.
Yeah, it's definitely it's real. It's not just in the movies. I can confirm. Um okay. So moving on to my number 3. This is my one that's just randomly not in 2014, and it is 1985 Silver Bullet. Uh, Once again, I think I need to rewatch this, The Mist, and Gerald's Game to confirm what my favorite Stephen King movie is. But from what I remember from the last time I saw the movies, Silver Bullet is still my favorite Stephen King movie. Also, I just generally like werewolves, and in my personal opinion, this is the best werewolf movie that we've gotten so far. I know it's old, and I know it's not an American Werewolf in London, but I still think it's really good. So, just as kind of a background for what the movie is, there's a bunch of unexplained murders that are happening in this really small town, and there are people who are investigating and they're trying to figure out who's doing it, and then they're getting murdered. And we follow a young Corey Haim who is in a wheelchair, and he just happens to find out who the murderer is. Of course, it's a werewolf, and then he has to fight this werewolf, and that's kind of the best way that I can put it without spoiling stuff. But I know it's 1985. I like the special effects. I think the story is really well done. Um, we've talked about it before how there's a chance that maybe I'm kind of biased just because I really like 80s movies. Maybe I give it more benefit of the doubt because when I'm trying to talk about I'm trying to be the devil's advocate here because I've talked about this to people before and they're like, well, Jacob, there are so many more werewolf movies that have more modern graphics or they do the werewolves better, the werewolves look cooler. But I generally think this has a really good story. I really like the werewolf design. Like I said, I'm always going to go for special effects over CGI. And so I just kind of respect the movie. This is also one of the first werewolf movies I watched as a kid, so I'm sure there's some bias from just seeing it through a child's eyes, loving it from growing up. But yeah, this is the I knew I needed to put a werewolf movie on here because it's creature feature, and this one's my personal favorite, and so that's why it is at number three. 1985 Silver Bullet.
I have not seen this one yet. However, I've heard very mixed things, but I've heard if you can get along with the 80s cheesiness, then you're going to have a great time with it.
I would
So,
agree with that. Yeah.
I'm not one who typically likes 80s cheese. However, this is definitely one that I've wanted to watch. Just because I love werewolf movies and I feel like those are the movies that we need.
I agree. I was always a little, I don't want to say upset, but vampires took over, and I really think werewolf movies should have. And I know they're not being done as much anymore, but I'm still waiting for that like great werewolf movie. And until then, I just get to chill with Silver Bullet. This one I definitely need to rewatch.
Yeah, I would have gone with American Werewolf in London personally, but I also just want to take this time to quickly say that The Howling is one of the most overrated movies of all time.
It's funny because so I wasn't gonna put The Howling on here, but I know that I think it was from 2005 that Cursed with Christina Ricci. Everybody says that's like the most trash movie ever, and I actually really like it for a werewolf movie. So just as long as you're throwing Howling out there, I want to throw Cursed out there as being extremely underrated.
Also, speaking of Neil Marshall, who did The Descent, Dog Soldiers is also very good.
That's one that I have not seen, but it's been on my list for a bit.
Really quick side tangent about Dog Soldiers. It doesn't have to make sense if you haven't, or it will make sense even if you haven't seen the movie. I just think that this is so funny. So, um, you watch Dog Soldiers, right? And it's a British made film. It's very heavy British slang, British, actors, whatever. Like I watch this, and it's just a straightforward, horror borderline action movie because it's about these soldiers fighting these werewolves and whatnot. Apparently, it's like really funny to British people. Like in England, it's like listed as like a comedy, but like you watched it as an American and it's just like a straightforward action, whatever. But apparently British people watch it and they like die laughing. So it's just one of those really interesting things where you'll watch it and interpret it so differently than I guess it's supposed to be. But that was just like a really quick side tangent that I learned that I thought was interesting.
That actually is really interesting. I always enjoy those movies where you are just totally not like you're not seeing what they're seeing, and that's okay. That's the beauty of the art of movies, but that's actually really cool to know.
So my number two, very basic pick. It's just a classic. Everyone knows by no means is this an underrated movie. This is one of the most well-known, horror movies, creature features of all time. It is The Thing from 1982.
I should have known this one would
So
be on your list.
yes, huge fan of this movie. In a previous podcast, I kind of crapped on John Carpenter a little bit. I still think he's an overrated director. However, I still like a lot of his movies. In the case of The Thing and then also original Halloween, I think are genuinely great. So The Thing, my number two favorite creature feature. It was actually, I found this out and I just thought this was an interesting bit of trivia. Written by a man named Bill Lancaster, writing this movie, a horror creature feature. He wrote The Bad News Thing, worth noting. But like I said, directed by John Carpenter, pretty early on in his career. This was only like his fourth or fifth movie, which out of his career of like 30 movies, very early on. For people that might not know or haven't checked it out yet, it's about a group of scientists and support staff at a remote Antarctic research station who discover a crashed alien craft under the ice and basically come face to face with this extraterrestrial that has the ability to shapeshift and completely mimic organic beings. So it is based on a novella called Who Goes There by sci-fi author John Campbell all the way back in 1938. I have read the original novella. It's quite good, very faithful adaptation. And for a very younger audience, this is one of the inspirations for Among Us. So if you think about what Among Us is, very much like this. This is like a paranoia thriller of who is the monster, who is the thing, who's not. It sort of keeps you guessing throughout the whole movie. So it's like a perfect whodunit, but like with a horror bend, not like a crime bend. It's like a thriller bend. It's just a straightforward creature feature horror whodunit. There's not much new to say about the special effects. Most people know that these special effects, they're legendary. What they were able to accomplish with just animatronics and makeup was just nothing short of incredible. So really good practical creature effects, really good practical makeup. Probably the best practical effects that have ever come to screen, in my opinion. And I think in most people's opinion, that's not a very hot take at all. That's a very cold take. And what I had said about Carpenter's style in Escape from New York, that didn't work for me there, about how he likes to do these like really long, drawn out sequences, maybe with even limited dialogue and just things happening. And I guess it's supposed to be like an immersive experience. That doesn't work for me with a lot of his films, like Escape from New York, when I talked about that. But I think that really works here because since this whole movie is like a paranoia sort of thriller about which person is the creature, which person is the thing, I think those sort of really drawn out sequences help add to the eeriness and the suspense, and I just think that his style works for a movie like this. um, a particular There's a scene involving them trying to figure out who the thing is when it comes to testing their blood, and it's one of the greatest jump scares of all time. And that's one of those sequences that's like the sequence itself is like feels like it's like 30 minutes long of just the same scene just going on playing out very mundanely. But in this case it works, just adding that tension and that suspense. And also it's famous, another one that's famous for its ending. In this case it's a very open ending. I won't say too much, but it just leaves it very open. It leaves, fans and nerds like myself just constantly arguing over what really happened. So, very classic pick, nothing new here, but I do genuinely love this film, so it goes up as my number 2 favorite creature feature.
Really quick before I talk, I am curious, what did you think of the prequel?
The prequel is, and thank you for bringing that up because I meant to mention it. The prequel is very underrated. It is not better than the original. It never was supposed to be. If you're putting, I mean, the original is one of the greatest of all time. So when you try to compare it to one of the greatest, most classic movies of all time, of course, it's not going to be as good, but it's still very worthwhile. It's an incredible attention to detail. It is a prequel that literally lines up till like the very last second or I guess the very first second of this movie. So there's so many little details and things they put into place that just shows they were really paying attention. They added this really cool idea about the creature not being able to replicate inorganic material like piercings or fillings. That's really interesting that they can use as a test. The worst part is just the CGI, which apparently was a studio decision because the first one has such great special effects. For some reason, in the prequel, the studio mandated that they had to do CGI. So, give or take, it's bad CGI. I won't beat around the bush, but if you can get beside that, it's a really good story, and everything else is done really well.
Yeah, that's unfortunately due to this time period. This was when so CGI had been a thing for a bit, but it was finally getting good, quote unquote, and so every company was trying to not only do CGI, but I feel like a lot of the companies at this time were also trying to do 3D. Just every movie that came out at this time had 3D. I don't remember if The Thing had 3D capability, but it was just the hot thing. But yeah, that's what I've always heard they never say the thing's bad because the story is bad. They always say the thing's bad because they use CGI. And so I personally haven't seen the prequel. I eventually want to watch it, but that's everybody just always is like, oh, it's so bad, don't do it. So I was just curious. Um, the I don't know if there's anything much more I can add to what you said. The first movie, the 1982, I think it is 1982 thing is like you said. It's a not only a horror classic, it's a movie classic. Everybody talks about it. Not even just creature feature. Many people consider it to be the best horror movie ever made. Um, I actually don't know. I would think some people might consider it the best movie ever made in general, not even with the horror additive. Just this, everybody loves this movie. It's heralded as one of those greats. And like you said, the ending is perfect. The scene where he's using the defibrillator and then the thing happens. I don't want to spoil it, but that always gives me. I always know it's coming, and it gets me every time. So that's this. Yeah, it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, any of our listeners, I highly recommend watching it.
Yeah, it's one of these movies that's weird because it definitely grew over time because this tanked at the box office and like critics
Yeah.
were like very mixed on it to say the least. There's even like I've even seen because I've watched videos explaining the history of this movie. It did terrible at the box office. It didn't even make back its own budget. Critics were at mixed to bad on it, and there's even like newspaper headlines of like Carpenter's career finished? Is like they literally thought it was like a career finisher. And then now it's like one of, like you said, one of the best horror movies of all time, universally one of the best movies of all time. And most people would probably say this is Carpenter's best movie aside from maybe Halloween, but it's definitely up there. So yeah, one of those movies people thought was gonna finish Carpenter forever. Um, I will say one more thing. Blumhouse owns the rights to this now, and they've been trying to move forward with a either reboot, legacy sequel, whatever. Probably a legacy sequel trilogy, probably for Blumhouse. But
What? They've
yeah. So
never done
who
that
knows what?
before.
Yeah, who knows what they're gonna do with it? But I do think it's interesting that Blumhouse does have the rights. So they're just collecting horror IPs like Infinity Stones. So who knows? Maybe we'll get a legacy sequel, a reboot. Who knows?
um. Okay, so real quick before I do my number two, I forgot to mention that in Silver Bullet, it also stars a young Gary Busey and a young Terry O'Quinn. So there's some more names to know. Uh, so my number two is going to come way out of left field. I will say every movie I've listed so far, I guess except for Backcountry, has been like a major motion picture. People generally have heard of the movie, and if you haven't seen it, um, with Backcountry, if I'm not mistaken, kind of like you said, a lot of people who watch IFC Midnight or maybe are in the indie scene, they have heard of that movie or at least seen it. My top two are definitely no one's heard of these movies. The one managed to do well enough to get a sequel out of nowhere, totally unexpected. But I'm just letting you know right now, these top two movies that I happen to pick are like bottom of the barrel. I found these scrolling like 100 pages into Google, but they're good, and that's why they're on this list. So the first one is 2014's Wolf Cop. You can already tell from the name what you're getting yourself into. So this is a horror comedy. Actually, I'm sorry. Technically, it's just supposed to be an action horror, but the budget was like $100 and it was filmed on Fruit by the Foot. So it kind of is a comedy. I highly recommend going in to watch it, expecting just to get some good laughs. Anyway, there is a cop who is in a small town and he magically just finds out that he's a wolf and there's a witch in town and he has to stop that witch. And there's this whole thing about his bloodline and a long line of all of his kin killing the witches in her blood. It's like a whole thing. It's just I will never this just like holds such a place in my heart from my childhood. I watched this movie, I fell in love with this movie. The sequel is trash. Do not watch the sequel. They got all of this funding and then just decided to throw it away on like the craziest special effects they could do. They ended up not even being good. They didn't care about the story. I wholeheartedly do not recommend the sequel, but the first movie is like one of those accidental masterpieces. Like I said, this dude had $100 in a dream, and in my opinion, I think it works out. Uh, Ironically, this is actually certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, so that's cool. Um, but yeah, it's just one of those like I keep talking about. There's good movies and there's fun movies, and this is just a really fun movie. It is completely cheesy. It is a B movie. I know it's not going to appeal to everybody, but it's just one of those ones from my childhood that I just had to put on here just because I love this movie. It also has a wicked soundtrack. They paid a real band to make like this action rap soundtrack so that way it can play in like epic sequences when he's fighting demons. It's a whole thing. This movie is like one giant acid trip and it's just epic. That's the best way I can describe it. So yeah, 2014's Wolf Cop.
I, to no surprise, have never seen this movie. That being said, I just Googled it because it sounded a little bit familiar. I have seen this poster, and I have, to your point, seen this frequently on like best worst movies of all time or things like that. So yeah, never seen it. It does sound intriguing. Maybe not something I would typically like because, like I said, I don't necessarily like the cheesy, but I don't know. Maybe one day we shall see.
It's the from if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you can kind of gather the types of movies that I tend to like. If you think that you align with my interests, I think you will love this movie. Uh, I just happen to really love like the B movies. I also really respect when there's just people who are like us who love movies and they want to go make a movie and then they do. And so I'll always watch those like a like Velocipaster, which is also just a hilarious movie that was filmed with no budget. But I always like when those movies just work out. A guy followed his dream, and so yeah, huge respect given to uh Lowell Dean. There we go.
See, I'm a big fan of Nazi Shark on Amazon Prime. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not, but now I'm looking it up.
It's literally a 5-minute clip of like sharks in an aquarium, and it just like overlays like audio from like Nazi rallies from like the 30s. It's the top tier cinema.
Um, so I do have to ask, have you ever seen Sharks of the Corn? It's also on Amazon Prime.
Have not, but that one intrigues me.
So it's literally dudes in shark masks who are running around in the corn killing people. They're not even real sharks. It's not fake CGI or sorry, I should say really bad CGI or anything. It's just dudes in like shark masks that they bought at Spirit Halloween and they're just running around on full two legs just with a shark mask murdering people and it's hilarious.
Sounds incredible. Okay. So my number one is, in my completely subjective opinion, objectively the best monster movie of all time, creature feature of all time, the ultimate creature feature, because there's so many. From technically 2011, because it first premiered at film festivals in 2011, but it didn't get a wider release until 2012. But it is The Cabin in the Woods. So this is written by Joss Whedon, who everyone knows from like Firefly, The Avengers, things like that, and Drew Goddard, who was a big TV person. He was on like Buffy. He was a writer for like Buffy, Alias, Lost, etc. Um, this was his directorial debut and also his like big time movie debut. Allegedly, both Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard wrote this because they locked themselves in a hotel room for a whole weekend and just knocked out this script. And it is essentially about this group of college friends who retreat to a remote cabin in the woods for a getaway weekend of partying, sex, drinking, all the above. And they fall victim to a menagerie of monsters while this shadowy organization manipulates events from underground to fulfill an ancient ritual. So, most people have probably heard of this movie for a while. This was like an underrated, underseen pick, like an indie darling. And then in recent years, I think TikTok might have had something to do with it. It like was a thing on TikTok, something about it. So it's like started to get a lot more mainstream appeal. For a while though, it really was like an underground movie. Um, but yeah, so without saying too much, there's just so many monsters in this, especially in the final act. It's incredibly original. I will just say there was a lawsuit where someone was alleging that they stole this idea from this like indie book that was published in the 2000s, but I don't know how that turned out. So I'll say it's very original for now, but just a very original premise coming out of something that sounds so cliche, but that's really the point. It's like framing the cliche in this very original story in this really creative story. So it's sort of like it's not a horror comedy, but there is a certain levity to it in a way where it's like Scream, where it's a deconstruction and satire, but basically to a whole other level of being meta of just the horror genre about the classic cabin in the woods setup of like, five college friends go to the cabin in the woods to party and they get attacked by a killer or a monster or something like that. So it's like a deconstruction and satire of that, but it's like super meta, like even more meta than Scream. And with all these different monsters, there's just so many cool like little Easter eggs, such diversity of cool things to explore. As I've alluded to in past podcasts, I'm a huge fan of when a movie has like a very cool like built-in universe and lore, and I think this has a lot of lore and universe to explore. I'd be really curious to maybe have some sort of sequel, spin-off, prequel, something, just to maybe see where this goes if done correctly, because I think this universe has a lot to offer. The whole last act is basically just carnage candy, just so many monsters, so much blood, so much gore. It really is a tight movie. It's like barely 90 minutes, so it's just like the perfect runtime where the entire time you're fully invested, you're fully watching, and it just has this sort of natural, funny feel, not like a trying to go for a punchline feel. And that's just because Joss Whedon helped write the script and he's really good at like punching up dialogue. But yeah, so just the ultimate creme de la creme creature feature, The Cabin in the Woods. It's also one of my favorite A, horror movies of all time, and also B, one of my genuine favorite movies of all time. So I love this. I've rewatched it like 80,000 times, and I'll continue to keep rewatching it because I just think it's that great and rewatchable.
Yeah, so this one's interesting, and I guess this ended up working out for the best. I wholeheartedly would have put this as my number one. However, because of the nature of the creatures that end up, I'm trying not to say this without spoiling, but since the majority of the movie revolves around zombies, I did not think this qualified. So for the sake of argument, I left it off the list because I didn't want to have to like justify why I put it on there. Um, I don't care that you did, of course, but that's why I left it off. Uh,
I just put it in the same camp as The Ritual, where it really doesn't come to be a creature feature until like the last 30 minutes, but it's still like when you watch it, it's still a central piece of the film.
Yeah, I totally accept it. That's just why, because I'm about to say the same things you did. This is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I show this movie to every person who will watch it. I think this is amazing. It's hilarious that it happens to star Chris Hemsworth. If I remember correctly, he filmed this before becoming famous. It's not like he was famous and then filmed it. It has Jesse Williams. It has my boy Fran Kranz, Bradley Whitford, who everybody now loves because he was in Get Out. Like it's just a really good movie. Like you said, it for all the things that I've talked about in the past about, You're Next or Scream or I Might Be the Killer, like those movies that you can tell the people who wrote them were fans of the genre. It's almost like a love letter to the genre, and they're dissecting and almost making fun of the tropes, but in the best way possible to where it's such a good movie. You hit the nail on the head with that one. That Cabin in the Woods is just a very it's a great one. I highly recommend it to everybody who has Max.
Yeah. So this was one of two movies that were filmed in like 2009, 2010 with Chris Hemsworth and got shelved. And then he became Thor in 2011 and they released him in 2011 and 2012. It was this and then the Red Dawn remake. But yeah, so like Chris Hemsworth looks so young because he's like 25 in this. But then when it got released, he was much older and he was Thor. But it's because it was filmed like 3 years before.
There you go. And 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. So if we didn't convince you, there you go. So, like I said, there's no surprise. This is not my number one. However, we'll say that Cabin in the Woods is my honorary number one. But my real number one is one that I think I've referenced on a podcast before, maybe not. This is another one of those movies that I happened to find on Netflix. I think it's really good. It's by Brett Simmons, who I'm pretty sure I've talked about before on the podcast. He does just a bunch of indie films that he funds himself. He basically makes a movie every like 4 years or so when he's able to have enough money to do it. And I've loved every movie that I've watched him do. He did Hush, he did I Might Be the Killer, and in between those, he did 2014's Animal. So this stars Keke Palmer, Jeremy Sumpter, Elizabeth Gillies, and Parker Young. Keke Palmer and Elizabeth Gillies, you may remember from Nickelodeon if you were a child. And then Jeremy Sumpter was Peter Pan. And Parker Young was on that show Suburgatory, if anybody ever watched that. And then they all just kind of came together to be two couples who get torn apart by an animal in a cabin in the middle of the woods. So ironically, I did pick the Cabin in the Woods to be my number one. It's just a different cabin in the woods. Um, yeah, this movie there's no tricks. There's nothing. I didn't pick a horror comedy. I didn't pick something that's an action, thriller, whatever. This is just a straight horror. The creature design is absolutely amazing. If you happen to look it up, you'll see the poster, you'll see the cover, you can get a glimpse of what the animal looks like. But it's kind of straightforward. Um, there's these four, there's these two couples, the four people I mentioned, who get caught in an isolated cabin, and they must fight to survive against this animal that they just happen to. It's kind of like The Descent in a way, but not in caves, where they're doing what normal couples do. They went for a hike, they happen to have some fun, and there was a creature out there that they did not know existed. And it's a bottle story. You get to learn a lot about the couples, about the people. All of these actors do a really good job, and it's just I can't really praise this movie enough. This is another one I definitely need to rewatch sometime soon. But yeah, this is another one that I found on Netflix for a while as I was like growing my horror repertoire of movies I had seen. This was one of my favorites. I would still probably comfortably say it's like top 20, but I don't know if I'd put top 10. I haven't like ranked my favorite horror movies, but yeah, this one's really good. It's conventionally scary. It doesn't necessarily scare me, so to speak. Not like what we were talking about with like The Descent or 47 Meters Down, but similar to what we echoed earlier. Anybody could go for a hike in the woods. Anybody could be camping, and for all we know, something shows up that we didn't know was out there, but it could be. And so then it's just, what would you do? And then they're trying to survive in a cabin with very limited supplies, and it's very solid. It's only like an hour and a half, and it doesn't feel like it's that long. The movie really flies by. You're so engulfed in what's happening with the characters that you kind of blink and the movie's done, and I don't think that's a bad thing. You don't feel like you've wasted your time like you do with some other movies. So yeah, 2014's Animal, and everybody should watch Brett Simmons make movies. He should totally be a bigger person in Hollywood because he makes awesome stuff.
Yeah, this is one I've never seen, but I've always actually wanted to see because I've seen that poster with the creature on it. looks like a very cool creature design. I sort of, just throughout this entire list, I just like, even in general, like outside of this list, I haven't talked about this much, but outside of this list, I'm a huge fan of like cryptozoology. Like I have a weird interest in like cryptids and cryptozoology. So anything dealing with like some like hidden monster that we didn't know was out there, some like hidden creature that's not just like a normal animal gone wild. I'm a big fan of. So yeah, this is one where I've just seen the poster over and over. Um, Definitely just need to check it out at some point. Do you know what is it on Netflix? Is that what you said?
I watched on Netflix. Right now, it's on Prime.
Okay. This is one I genuinely will probably check out pretty soon because I've wanted to see this.
Yeah, this is definitely. Uh, so I've never seen The Monkey's Paw, which is the only other movie that he's done. I've heard good things about Monkey's Paw. If I'm not mistaken, that's his most famous quote unquote movie. But I can confirm Husk is amazing, Animal's amazing, and You Might Be the Killer is amazing. I highly recommend all three. Brett Simmons is awesome.
All right, there you go. Creature features.
Yes. Hopefully we made you scared. You don't want to go outside anymore. You don't want to go swimming, and you don't want to go into the forest.